Welcome to the Restricted Handling Daily Intel Brief. Let's dig in. Here's what's been going on in Russia in the last 24 hours. Former Ukrainian Commander-in-Chief Valery Zelensky, now serving as Ukraine's ambassador to Britain, said Ukraine has no realistic path to joining NATO under current conditions. His argument was straightforward. Ukraine still does not meet the alliance's military requirements and lacks some of the advanced capabilities already deployed by NATO members, including stronger missile defense and space capabilities. That is a significant statement because Zelensky is not just a former military official. He remains one of Ukraine's most trusted public figures and one of the few people with enough credibility to openly challenge assumptions about the country's future. His comments highlight one of the hardest questions facing Kyiv and its partners. If NATO membership remains uncertain, what security structure can realistically protect Ukraine after the fighting eventually ends? At the same time, President Volodymyr Zelensky continues reshaping Ukraine's senior security leadership. Zelensky moved Rustem Umerov, Ukraine's former defense minister and chief negotiator with Russia, to lead the Foreign Intelligence Service. Umerov will continue overseeing diplomatic efforts, including negotiations with Moscow and efforts to expand Ukraine's drone partnerships with foreign countries. Former Interior Minister Ihor Klimenko is taking over as Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council, while Ambassador Olha Stefanishina was removed from her position in Washington after nearly a year representing Ukraine in the U.S. Capitol. This follows the recent removal of Defense Minister Mikhailo Fedorov and Military Commander Alexander Syrsky. The changes have generated criticism inside Ukraine, with some questioning the pace and transparency of the reshuffle. Zelensky's team argues the changes are designed to prepare the government for another difficult phase of the war, particularly as Russia continues targeting Ukraine's infrastructure and preparing for another winter campaign. On the Russian side, Moscow is facing increasing pressure from a Ukrainian strategy designed to make Russia defend the entire depth of its territory, not just the front line. One of the clearest examples is the continued impact on Russia's energy sector. Ukrainian strikes have pushed Russian oil refining to its lowest level in more than 2 decades. 18 Russian refineries were targeted in July, along with additional attacks on tankers, ports, and pipelines. The significance here is bigger than individual strikes. Energy revenue remains one of the foundations of Russia's ability to sustain the war. Moscow has spent decades building its identity around being an energy superpower, using oil and gas as both an economic engine and a geopolitical tool. Ukraine is now attempting to turn that same dependency into a vulnerability. Russia is responding by trying to protect commercial shipping in the Black Sea and finding alternate routes for exports. That matters internationally because both Russia and Ukraine remain major agricultural exporters. The longer maritime disruption continues, the greater the potential impact on global food markets, especially in regions that rely heavily on Black Sea grain supplies. Ukraine has also expanded its campaign against Russian logistics and commercial infrastructure. A notable target has been Wildberries, one of Russia's largest online retailers, and a company deeply connected to the country's consumer economy. Ukrainian drone strikes have hit multiple Wildberries facilities since July, including a warehouse in Vladimir Oblast where more than 200 firefighters responded to a major blaze. The message from Kyiv is that Russia's war effort depends on more than tanks and ammunition. It relies on warehouses, transportation networks, energy systems, and industrial capacity. Ukraine is trying to increase the cost of keeping that system running. Inside Russia, the Kremlin is also confronting a growing domestic security challenge. A recent case involving Ryazan resident Gorday Nikitin illustrates the increasingly aggressive methods being used by Russian security services. According to independent Russian reporting, the FSB identified Nikitin through anti-war comments online, then contacted him while posing as Ukrainian military intelligence. That interaction later became the basis for a treason conviction and a 17-year prison sentence. The case reflects a broader pattern of Russian authorities expanding the definition of national security threats. Since the invasion of Ukraine, Moscow has increasingly treated online speech, political criticism and alleged foreign contacts as potential espionage cases. Another example of Russia's tightening political environment came with Boris Nadezhdin, a prominent anti-war politician, leaving Russia for Paris. Nadezhdin gained attention during the 2024 presidential election when his campaign briefly became a rare public challenge to Vladimir Putin before authorities prevented him from running. His departure represents another opposition figure moving outside Russia as the Kremlin continues reducing political space for dissent. There was also a major security incident in Moscow over the weekend when an explosive device detonated outside the Balzy Rossi restaurant, killing 5 people and injuring others. Russian authorities blamed Ukraine, though Kyiv has not claimed responsibility. The incident drew attention because Russian sources suggested the event may have been connected to Aerospace Forces Commander General Alexander Shakeup. That connection remains unconfirmed. But the possibility itself creates an uncomfortable situation for Moscow. Russia has long projected an image of tight internal control and elite security. Any successful attack against people connected to senior military leadership challenges that narrative. On the battlefield, Russia is focused on creating conditions for future operations rather than achieving immediate breakthroughs. Russian forces are increasing pressure against Ukrainian logistics around Slovyansk and Kramatorsk in eastern Ukraine, targeting supply routes and infrastructure before any potential larger offensive. The approach is familiar: degrade the opponent's ability to sustain defensive positions before attempting major ground advances. But Russian forces have not achieved significant confirmed breakthroughs, and Ukraine continues defending key areas while conducting its own long-range strike campaign. One of the most notable developments in this war remains the evolution of unmanned warfare. Ukraine continues using drones not just as battlefield tools, but as strategic instruments capable of reaching deep into Russian territory and forcing Moscow to dedicate resources to protection. Ukraine's use of unmanned systems has changed the nature of the conflict. A country with fewer traditional resources has found ways to impose costs on a much larger opponent by combining technology, intelligence, and rapid adaptation. Russia is adapting as well, developing new drone variants and expanding strike capabilities against Ukrainian infrastructure. The competition increasingly resembles a constant cycle of innovation and counter-innovation, where each side searches for the next advantage. The broader picture is that this war is no longer defined only by territory captured or lost. It is a contest over endurance, economic pressure, political stability, intelligence capabilities, and industrial capacity. Ukraine is attempting to convince Russia that continuing the war will become increasingly expensive. Russia is attempting to convince Ukraine and its partners that it can absorb those costs longer. The outcome may ultimately depend on which side can sustain pressure while maintaining support from its population, allies, and industrial base. Thanks for listening. Keep your maps open, your sources skeptical, and your notifications on. For the written brief, find us at restrictedhandling.substack.com. See you tomorrow.